Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Voices of Forestry podcast. I'm your host, Seth Stevenson, the communications coordinator with the Arkansas Forestry Association. And today, we're going to be taking a look at a specific forest product, railway ties specifically. And before I introduce our guest to help us down the path of railway ties, let me give a special shout out and thank you to our sponsor this month, DDK Forestry and Real Estate. We're going to hear a little bit more from them later on in this episode. But for now, let me introduce our guest for this month. It is Dr. Nate Irby, the Executive Director of the Railway Ties Association. Nate, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey Seth, man, we love AFA. Thank you guys for the opportunity. Lots going on in the industry right now across the landscape, whether it's loggers all the way through the supply chain to finished products. We're encapsulating a small part of that, but it's great that different associations that represent different facets of our industry are getting together. So we appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, for sure, man. And you actually, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Nate, you and I met at the Southern Forestry Association Executives and Communicators meeting.
Correct.
We all get together there at the end of the year, and you kind of got connected to that through the Mississippi Forestry Association. Is that right?
Yeah, man. Former life, I was communications director for Mississippi Forestry Association. Also did some lobbying while I was there. Man, that was back 2012, 2013 when I did that. But I got ingrained with that Southern Forestry Association's executives group then. And then I went to work in the railroad industry for Union Pacific Railroad as their subject matter expert for all things forest products. Railroads use a lot of wood, and that's kind of eye-opening for some people is how much wood is actually used by the railroad industry. And then in 2021, I left Union Pacific and went to work for the Railway Tie Association, and then was still invited to come to those Southern Forestry Association meetings there in Alabama. And it's just a good, I know you've probably spoken eloquently about those meetings, but it's a good meeting in terms of if you look at the cross section of who's there, but also not only do we benchmark, we help advance each other's associations by sharing what's working, what's not working. The executives have their little breakout, the direct comms folks have their breakout, but we all kind of come together and help advance what's going on. So it's a really enriching, welcoming, and fruitful experience.
I think that's one of the unique things about the South is that we do have that relationship with each other. It's not, Arkansas versus Louisiana versus Mississippi versus yeah. It's we all come together and are willing to help each other because we all have the same goal in mind ultimately. And we've done a couple podcast episodes with some of the folks down during that meeting that you can go, dear listener, and listen to a little bit later if you want to. But yeah, it's a very interesting and it's a great opportunity for us to kind of come together and talk about what's working, what's not, and problem solve together. Well, Nate, you kind of covered your background a little bit there. Is there anything else you want to add? Because we usually start with the professional background if we have a new guest. But is there anything else that you want to add that you might have missed just in your off the cuff intro there?
Well, first off, the word professional isn't always synonymous with me, so don't throw that around too loosely. Seth, I come from a hardwood sawmill background. My father was part owner of a large sawmill. When I say part owner, a very, very small part, but large hardwood sawmill. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, which was the hardwood capital of the United States for a long time. My dad was one of the key influencers and initiators of global exports of lumber. And so in the late 80s, early 90s, he spent a lot of time overseas, Spain, Italy, Vietnam, Japan, China, you name it, exporting Mississippi bottomland hardwood lumber. And so it told a really good story. I'll dip back into our talking about how great the Southern Forestry Association executives meeting is and the relationships. Even today, Seth, our businesses are relationship oriented businesses. And I'm not talking about just the association, the membership associations, the trade associations. I'm talking about moving a log to a sawmill and then the sawmill diversifying and moving those products out. all those links in that chain is relationship oriented. People like to do business with folks that are like-minded, or at least they have, that set of parameters in which this fills a need. I would also say that uh, as I developed from a young person working in the summertime on the log yard at the sawmill to then going into education at Mississippi State with that primary background in. I saw a sawmill work. I saw it put food on our table. I got exposed to my dad's international travels and business. My mother was a school teacher. She taught, had degrees in biology, chemistry, and physics. And so uh, I kind of amalgamated those two pathways into my own unique. And again, I'm just a guy, just navigating this world blessedly and humbly as I can. I went to Mississippi State University. I went into the forest products degree program. I had a concentration in wood industries management for my bachelor's. That segued straight into a master's project, which I did at my dad's sawmill. And then I developed the love for teaching. So you see where I'm coming from that, Seth, is
Hmm.
I love the forest products business that I got, indoctrinated in with my dad and all his doings. And then my mother's love of science and teaching. And so I got offered the Hoffman Fellowship at North Carolina State University to pursue a PhD. And so I went there for 3 years, and then taught classes, did research, all that kind of stuff. Moved back west, but stopped at the American Wood Protection Association in Birmingham. Did a short stint there as their marketing and public relations guy, and then got hired on by the Mississippi Forestry Association. Like I said, mostly doing director of comms works, but some lobbying and stuff like that. I had a really strong boss at the time, a guy named Tedrick Ratcliffe, and he and I were the same age, very ambitious. There wasn't room for both of us there. And one of my professors at Mississippi State, said, "Hey, Union Pacific is looking for a forest products guy. They don't want a fresh graduate. They want a professional." Again, that term, can't throw that around too seriously. You ought to take a look at it. And man, just divine nature of things, the Lord's perfectness. Here you and I are sitting here talking today.
Okay. Okay. Well, Nate, let's kind of talk about the association that you're with currently, the Railway Ties Association. Can you just give us a little bit of information about what that association is and its goal, purpose, mission, whatever word you want to use? What is the Railway Ties Association?
Yeah, appreciate that. We don't have enough time. I get the pleasure to be the executive director, have been for 5 years going now. The RTA has been around since the early 1900s. It is the association for railway tie supply. And so wood is still 90 plus percent of what's put in track today in terms of ties, in terms of track systems. And so RTA been around for over 100 years now. We have anywhere between 26 and 27, 50, 100 members. What that represents is the full spectrum from our primary producers all the way through the railroads that use the products, the contractors that put the ties in for some of the railroads, et cetera. And so we're very centered around that supply chain, representing that supply chain. At one time, we were probably 3,000 strong, but as industries consolidate, corporate margins are what they are. People navigate in and out of different industry segments. Where we're at today is, like I said, around 26, 2,700. It's a little bit fluid. We hold three main events throughout the year, RTA does. Our first is in March, first of the year, in terms of the cadence, is our educational seminar. It's called the Tie Grading Seminar. We hold that in March. We move all of our meetings around the country to accommodate our membership. We don't have one set area that we operate in the summertime, we have what we call our member field trip, and that's just it is an educational journey. We call it going from tree to track. And so that full spectrum again, you'll see the kind of a theme there. RTA represents that full supply chain. Therefore, we do all things in terms of tree to track, in terms of representing that collective body, that membership. And then our premier event is in October. That's our annual conference, which is more of a technical symposium, and we have a collection of um, technical talks throughout the day and then fun optional activities, maximizing the opportunity for network and engagement, bringing us together, in those three staple items: the tide rating seminar in the spring, member field trip in the summer, and then our annual technical symposium in the fall.
Okay. And so like you said, you guys are based in Mississippi, right? Is where you're headquartered. Is that right?
Well, in this day and time, where you're based is just a reflection of where you get your mail. We're
Yeah.
dynamic and we're really international. But I
Hmm.
live in Vicksburg. This is where the sawmill was. This is home. But as you could probably see off of social media, and I say that our folks use my photo too much on social media. But as you can see, we're dynamic. We're all over the
Hmm.
place, visiting members, making new friends, talking to our legislators. And it's mostly federal, but if there are state level issues, we do get involved. But we're all over the place. I travel about 70% of the time now. And it's again, it's doing the work of the association, bringing the industry together, providing education network. Um, yeah, I failed to say in the initial question, our mission, our vision is to keep wood ties strong and sustainable. And so, in all that we do, that is the core of what we do, whether it's an educational thing or a fun getting together thing or a technical symposium, etc. All those things feed into it. So, yes, my laptop and my cell phone land in Vicksburg, and that's where our office is. But it's really just a landing point. We're all over the place all the time.
Okay. Well, Nate, I warned you ahead of this that I might be asking some pretty basic or simple questions, but I want to just kind of set a nice foundation before we kind of launch into some of these more detailed discussions later in the episode. But can you just kind of explain? So you mentioned that wood products was a bigger part of the railway industry than people might realize. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about what are we talking about when we mention railway ties, and how big of an impact does the wood products industry play in the railway industry?
Yeah, so great question. We've kind of scatter punched it already, but just let's collect our thoughts and then just kind of build this by order of magnitude. And so our railroads today are predominantly run on 7 inch by 9 inch by 8.5 foot long cross ties. And those cross ties are mainly hardwoods. Uh, of that percentage of hardwoods, there's the majority is going to be oak and hickory because of their hardness. You're running big, heavy trains across those pieces of wood. And so if you go out and look at a set of tracks, obviously you'll see the ballast or the gravel, the foundation, and then up from that you'll see wood cross ties, 7 by 9 by 8.5 is the majority of them, and then running perpendicular to that you'll see the metal rail, and that's what obviously the train runs on. And I don't oversimplify that to discount anybody or anybody's working knowledge, but if we start building out the magnitude of the industry. When you look down a set of railroad tracks and you see those things, you see good wood products holding up a set of rail that moves freight and people and keeps up operating today. UP's slogan or mission was, Union Pacific's was building America. Well, think about, Seth, the great story that wood ties tell. It's something that we sourced here. God grew this. It's a natural, renewable resource. We have folks here that are employed to fell that tree and then to saw that tree into different merchantable products. And then it moves more products by virtue of what it is. And so we typically say there's 3,200 ties, wood ties, per linear mile of track. And now you think about we have 136,000 miles of railroad track in North America. My little head can't do that math, but it's over 600 million ties in service at any given time in North America. Most of those are hardwoods. And it tells such a great, warm and fuzzy, buy America, source America, running America story that it can sell itself in terms of influencing or educating or ranking awareness. And so I'll say that with that 90+% of what's in track isn't just those cross ties that you see. You see road crossings that are made out of wood. You see bridges that are made out of wood or a wood product. You see diamond crossing timbers, signal machine timbers, all these different things that the railroad runs on. And like I said earlier, it tells a really good story, and it's often eye-opening to people that say, wow, I didn't know there was that much wood used by a railroad.
And how long is the average like lifespan of one tie? Once you have a finished tie, it's installed. What's the average lifespan for one tie?
Yeah, so it's relative, as you could imagine. You know, we're
Hmm.
going to have a biodeterioration profile for ties, a wood product, just like utility poles. We have a map of North America, and we have different highlighted areas that show in terms of the biodeterioration profile of wood products in that area. As you can imagine, the Gulf region, Gulf Coast region, would be more severely attacked. Wood would be more severely attacked by fungi, insects, termites, etc., that would deteriorate that wood and shorten its lifespan versus going to Tucumcari, New Mexico, where it's more desert-like and you don't have those agents that deteriorate wood. And so 20 to 25 years is our average lifespan of a wood tie. And I'll qualify that, Seth, a little bit and expand a little bit on that is when you go down and see a railroad track and you see ties that have been recently pulled out of track, we call those windrows. They're waiting to be picked up. A lot of us wood people would look at that stack of ties and say, "There's still some good ties in there." Well, that's a management decision that our railroad partners make. You know, you think about the Air Force or aeronautic industry. You think about airplanes and airplane engines. Well, obviously they're going to replace them based on a time factor. They're going to replace them before they actually need to be replaced. Well, you could apply some of that same mentality to wood ties that are in track. A railroad says, hey, we need to go change out ties in this subdivision. And look, we may not be back there for another 7 years. So not only are we going to replace the outright ones that we need to replace today, we may make a management decision and go ahead and pull some ties that otherwise would have survived another 7 years. And so that brings that average lifespan number down. But again, it's all for the benefit of safety and efficiency.
Well, and it's got to be a pretty big undertaking too. Going in and taking just one tie out doesn't seem super logical or feasible. Like if you're there, just go ahead and replace them. That way you don't have to come back next year and replace another one that uh, just had one more year left in it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of absolutely correct, and we could expect somebody that may be listening said, "Man, that's an interesting concept." We talk a lot about this in our tie grading seminar that we put on in March. You could go to rta.org and look at the calendar. It has sold out for 5 years in a row,
Wow.
and that seminar is a true cross section of all the different elements that have something to do with a wood cross tie. And it's a great and wonderful thing to see. And it's 3.5 days of immersion into all things wood ties, and we talk about those decisions that the railroads have to make, a management decision on pulling ties. We talk specifically about railroad engineering, why wood actually outperforms concrete, steel, and rubber plastic composites, all those alternatives. Some of those alternatives have their place in track, but like I told you earlier, wood is still 90% of what's used in track in terms of ties and timbers, etc. The tie grading seminar that I'm talking about goes into that whole entire, uh, not only building a base knowledge of wood, why wood, how wood performs, but also an elemental knowledge building of these are why these decisions are made. This is why this performs this way. And then this is how you would actually go down track, look at treated ties in track, and you can evaluate those ties. So it's full spectrum from sourcing considerations all the way to in track, in service applications, simulations of what ties look like in track, why these are still performing, the way to install them, what to look for in terms of rating them, and then making those decisions, those management decisions on when to disposition those.
Okay. Well, Nate, I tell you what, we're going to take a quick pause here. This seems like a good spot. We've got a lot more that we're going to talk about here in the second half of the episode, but we're going to take a quick stop here to hear a little bit more from our sponsors this month, DDK Forestry and Real Estate. DDK proudly supports the AFA. In 1962, Mr. Jerry Davis started DDK with a core value of wanting to help forest landowners. With the professional services DDK provides, they allow landowners to have complete confidence in their portfolio, knowing that their property is managed at the highest level from an expert team with years of experience. Give DDK Forestry and Real Estate a call today and let them help you begin your land legacy. 501-219-8600 or visit them at forestryrealestate.com. Thank you once again to DDK Forestry and Real Estate for their continued support of the show. So, Nate, we're in the last half, and there's some kind of broader, bigger, whatever word you want to use there, topics that I want to touch on. But first, something that we do probably need to touch on real quick is just how big is the railway ties industry? I know you guys work with a couple of sawmills here in Arkansas, specifically Wilson Brothers is one of the bigger guys I think that you guys work with. I could be mistaken, but how big is the railway ties industry in the country?
Yeah, so in terms of our sawmill, what we call our direct producers of
Mm-hmm.
ties, at one time there was well over 1,000 sawmills in North America that cut cross ties. That number has shrank for a variety of reasons. I will say that our depth of understanding about what a hardwood sawmill is facing today and the decision to cut this or cut that has changed, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But there's still several hundred sawmills that cut cross ties day in, day out. There's some big players like Wilson Brothers or Anthony, et cetera, that's in the state of Arkansas, several dozen actually, that within Arkansas. Arkansas is a big tie producing state, second to Missouri. And it's because of the timber. The timber lends itself to being not necessarily shorter, but you have a good mix of hardwoods versus pine stands, and then the mix in between. And so logistically, Arkansas makes sense to push a lot of ties out. There's a couple of three large uh, tie treating plants, cross tie treating plants in the state of Arkansas, and so it's a big output state when it comes to producing ties. Now, that's in addition to the sawmills, several
Mm-hmm.
dozen sawmills that operate within the state of Arkansas that feed these large mills, and they're spread out from the western part of the state to central and then the southeastern part of the state, just to name those, where they are linked directly to our railroads. And so those treating plants are very vertically integrated in terms of they can receive green ties in by by rail car, process, dry, and preservative treat those ties, and then ship them back out on the railroad's own rail cars to whatever project, whatever area of track the railroad is working on.
Okay. So yeah, and that's I guess another process or step of the process that I hadn't thought about is, once they leave the sawmill, they're still not done, they're cut, but they do need to go to that second processing facility to get them treated and make sure that they are ready to withstand the wear and tear on the actual railroad.
Yeah, and so it's again, it adds to the color uh of how many people are involved to get
Hmm.
one cross tie from tree to track, and the great story that that tells.
Yeah. Well, Nate, let's kind of talk about some of the issues. I know you and I talked a little bit before, and there's some things you wanted to discuss here in this section. But what are some of the issues that the railway tie industry is currently facing right now?
Yeah, so again, that's one of those questions we don't have enough time, but in the spirit of trying to consolidate that huge set of parameters down into just a few performance indicators, if you will. Cross ties right now, when we look at, let me back up. When we look at the pulse of the industry, and RTA has done a stellar job of portraying that pulse to our industry. We gather volunteer data from our members to help us then portray the industry statistics. And so, since 1987, we've held a triangulated approach or data set, if you will, of what's going on in the industry. And what that really means, Seth, is that's looking at tie production, the purchase of those ties by the railroad, and then what's installed. And so that's how we triangulate that data and have a high degree of accuracy, a low coefficient of variability in terms of we know what's produced, what's being purchased by the railroads, and then what they're installing. You can imagine there's a lag in that process. And so what's happening now and what's been happening for the last 18 to 24 months is our hardwood sawmills have, especially since COVID, have seen in general waning demand for grade hardwood lumber. And so there was a spike right after COVID, and then we've seen a general decline, and it's getting stronger in what domestically is being absorbed in terms of hardwood lumber, grade lumber, and so things like furniture, cabinetry, flooring, etc. And so ties are an industrial type product, and so they kind of call that the non-grade marketplace. What we're seeing is, especially in the last 18 to 24 months, as grade lumber continues to decline. And Seth, you'll know all the reasons why hardwood lumber has seen a decline. It's particularly because of these substitute products that are out there.
Hmm.
Your laminate type flooring, your plastic flooring that has a veneer over the top of it that makes it look like wood, but it's not actually wood. Cabinetry that's more medium density fiberboard and painted over rather than solid hardwood that's polyurethane or stained. You'll see other examples of that from all the different consumer goods that used to be hardwood is now something else. And so, furniture, for example, the hardwood furniture markets have dwindled. Tupelo, Mississippi used to be a large furniture market, not nearly as big as the North Carolina furniture market, but you've seen a general decline in those. Cost, preferences, styling, etc. All that feeds into it. So we've had this general decline in domestic consumption of hardwoods. We have seen some exports that have helped, but the problem, the substitute products have come in. And then in terms of exporting, what's happening now with the pressures our hardwood sawmills that are left are facing is unfair foreign competition. And I'll I won't get into the weeds when it comes to this, but basically think about owning a business here in the United States and all the great things that says about our economy, capitalism, etc. But unfortunately, we are regulated. Our input costs continue to rise, and then there's only certain segments of our industries that actually get some protection and help from a federal level. Yet we have this growing number of sawmills popping up overseas. I told you earlier, my dad was one of the pioneers in exporting a finished product that was created here, grown here, and created here in the United States, and then shipped overseas to then they produce that into a final piece of material. Well, now we're seeing a shift in foreign entities creating their own sawmills. They can buy logs from the United States. We can export logs to these foreign countries, and they develop those products. They're not as regulated. They don't have as high input costs. Their labor costs are pennies compared to what we are. They can buy a log, ship it over there, produce it into a product, and then sell it back. So it's an unfair foreign competition scenario. And so there's some strategy at play to help our producers, our sawmill producers, because the last 18 to 24 months, they've overproduced cross ties. Cross ties generally, we say year over year, it takes 18 to 22 million ties a year to maintain North America's track. That's not new track development, that's maintenance, and it's a healthy thing. Well, right now, because of this trend of hardwood domestic demand being down with coupled with unfair foreign competition, we've seen this general decline in other hardwood commodities being profitable for our hardwood producers. And so ties being an industrial product and ties still on that steady cadence of 18 to 22 million ties a year, the producers flocked to that open market. Well, then they overproduced. And so now we're sitting in a situation where going back to how we keep up with the pulse of the industry, we talk about production, we talk about purchases, and we talk about what's being installed. We're in a glut situation, Seth, when it comes to ties. We're over inventoried on ties to keep up with that 18 to 22 million plane. And so right now, at the end of March, and RTA presents all this data at rta.org. If you look at our statistics, again, this is volunteer data. This is high degree of accuracy data. Right now, we're sitting at a production rate of 21,373,000. And so we're at the very top end
Mhm.
of that bracket, right? And so if we look at the current inventory, so that's our production pace. If we look at current inventory, we're over 20 million, 20.7 in inventory. Well, as my dad would say, that cake don't bake. We're looking at a situation where we've got way too much inventory, production's too high, inventory's too high. It's just going to take a while for our friends out on track to be able to install those ties and get us back into more of a harmonious inventory production install scenario. And so right now we've got a lot of hardwood sawmill producers that found their way from a grade market heavy to then producing cross ties because got to get while the getting's good. And now the industry has been overproduced and inventory is too high. Seth, we've got a sawmill a week closing, and we have
Mhm.
since last fall. And it's because of all these different challenges. And so that's where we're at, man. A lot of my conversations are about man, I was cutting ties and I don't have a place for my ties. And I said, well, you don't. It's the industry's overproduced. We've got too much inventory. And I said, but don't remember, please remember, don't forget why we're here is because of the larger issue of substitute products that aren't hardwood solid. The domestic demand is down, and then we've got unfair competition abroad. And so what us and several other entities are doing, Seth, is we're engaging. our policymakers in multiple ways. And so we've got the idea, the concept of let's educate our policymakers. That's help them understand that it tells a great story
Hmm.
using American made this, and this for say, hey, government purchases. Put in your procurement plan that hey, all the desks in this new federal office building have to be domestically produced, domestically sourced, domestically made, and then we complete a circle and we keep it here. We keep it on shore. And then in addition to that, maybe from beyond government procurement, we talk to our policymakers about, hey, we've got rural America at stake here. We've got an economy that is collapsing in a nutshell that is akin to our farmers that produce, different things that they produce. It's a similar type concept. And so there's some help, some relief that needs to happen there. And then help them further educate themselves on the necessity of, and this is again something that people don't necessarily think about. You can think about ties as a national security in concept. And so, to put that in context, if we do have to engage because of conflict, our railroads are key. Our railroads are pivotal in moving, personnel, moving freight in terms of engagement. And so, if we don't have hardwood sawmills to produce, to maintain these roads, we're at a critical impasse potentially. And so, the threat is real. It wasn't for one direct reason. It's a highly complicated and complex issue, and I appreciate you letting me share more about that. Our engagement in this is going to grow and grow, and so, like I said, we're engaging policymakers at the federal level, educating them about the dire situation when it comes to hardwood production domestically.
And now, is this engagement a kind of RTA spearhead, or are there multiple organizations and groups involved in providing that education and trying to make these changes happen?
Seth, I'd say we're a collaborator. We're on the advisory board just because crossties is such a big hardwood commodity in terms of overall production. The spearhead would be the National Hardwood Lumber Association. And so they've taken on the brunt of they are the gateway, and the rest of us meet, engage with our firms, our lobbying firms. I'd say that the wood products industry at large is highly fragmented, and then
Mhm.
you could say that so much more so granularly with the hardwood industry, very fragmented. And so this is an effort to help us unite and help us to say a consolidated or build a consolidated talking point, agenda, and then combat plan. And so NHLA
Okay.
is the ringleader on that. We're just a collaborator.
Okay. And I just want to make sure we're giving credit to whoever is in charge here and whoever's involved with making these conversations happen and getting that education going for
Well, we,
those
we want our
listeners.
producers, all levels of producers, all folks that move a hardwood product. We want them to know that we hear you,
Hmm.
we need you, and we're fighting for you. And it's going to be a consolidated attack plan. We've got lots of hardwood producers that sit on the board of this effort. I mean, it's all hands on deck, and we're engaging our railroad partners for a number of reasons. First being, hey, your supply chain is at threat. That's number one. And then our large class one railroads have a lot of influence, have a lot of power. And then if you combat or add or couple to that, there's 600 short line and regional railroad companies. And so when you start thinking about how does freight move, a lot of our short line and regional railroads are point of origin. They own the mile or two leading in and out of this port, or this terminal, that then they get on to a class one railroad and go across several states or whatever. And so it's a combined effort. Like I said, there's 600 privately owned, well, some of not all private, but 600 short line and regional railroads in addition to our big class one, five, or six that are out there. We've got a potential merger going on, but that would be the heart of our current issue. Now you say, well, hold on, you look good on inventory. Uh, it is that your focal point on how the pulse of the industry is right now? It's the largest fire that needs to get dealt with, but I don't want to overshadow that with how blessed and great the RTA is doing. Like I said, selling out the seminar 5 years in a row, all the engagement with our members. We're a strong, tight association. We learn from others at the Southern Forestry Association executives event, etc. We are doing well, just our industry is hurting, and we have to have solutions for the mid and long term, and that's what we're actively working for.
Okay. Well, Nate, let's kind of we talked about the current issues, but with your expertise, what do you think the future holds for the railway ties industry? I know there's a lot. We just talked about a lot of stuff that's happening and trying to get that stuff moving in the right direction. But what do you think the future holds for railway ties?
Yeah, the word expertise makes me nervous. Um, I right now and looking forward, we like to say we're forward thinking. All of our associations like to say that because we're the entity that represents, and we want to be ahead of things. Certainly want to be strategic rather than tactical. The long term, mid long term for our industry falls back to that 18 to 22 million ties a year. And so our railroads, being what they are, they can't defer maintenance because it's so hard to catch back. It would be too hard to catch back up. Our railroads are dealing with some of the same issues that all industries are right now. Input costs are rising. There's regulation concerns, and we won't get into that, but it's harder to do business today than it was yesterday for all these different reasons. Input costs coming up, insurance costs, regulation. And then if you think about our railroads, Seth, they don't get a tax incentive to operate. And I'm not trying to talk down about any other industry, but our railroads maintain their road, their track. And so they've taken on the brunt of that. Whereas, like a trucking firm runs across, county and highways and interstates, et cetera, to move material. Railroads are doing that uh, in a more of a private sense. They're maintaining their roads, and there are some instances where federal grants and federal in-kind low interest loans do occur, and it's great. It helps keep things moving, people and freight. But by and large, your railroads are responsible for move their own corridors. And so what's stays in my mind about how the future is we got to have 18 to 22 million ties a year, Seth. And so there's security in that, but there doesn't need to be complacency. And so yeah, we're trying to get ahead of things, keep our supply chain intact, make sure our end users, all the way back to the folks that are point of origin, are taken care of. Again, that mission statement of keeping wood ties strong and sustainable is a lofty type thing and has multiple meanings to it. We're in a good place. We have concerns about that supply chain. As any association, we have to go through the peaks and valleys of perhaps member consolidation, different issues of are we maximizing our output? If I approach somebody that's not a member of RTA and I provide them our output and they still don't see where they fit into that, well, that means that we've got work to do. We got to make sure that we're being representative. We're promulgating those entities for all the right reasons and giving them the value that we are representing. A lot of your forestry associations say they're the voice of forestry for whatever state that they're in. And so, our job as RTA, as representing the railway tie industry, is to be that education, awareness, R&D, technical input, technology transfer, all those things fit into our Venn diagram. And that at the beginning of every day and at the end of every day is what we're centered around. And I do like our output, but I know it could be, there's things that as we go, again, what fire is the biggest right now, and making sure we're being more strategic than tactical, but the outlook is good.
Well, and that's one of the things, I commend these national organizations. For us, AFA, we've got a very defined area of focus that we can kind of focus on and worry about. But for an association like yourself, having to look at a broader countrywide aspect, it is a little more difficult having to move around and make sure you guys are covering everybody. So I commend you guys for the work that you're doing to cover the entire Railway Ties Association across the country.
Yeah, and we're a small shop.
Hmm.
We've only got 3 employees. And so, like I said, with my travel heavy, um, we try to make the best, maximize doing more with
Yeah.
less, and I think we do a fair and equitable job of that. Just like these, all these different associations that take on the responsibility of supporting a industry. Uh, you hope at the end of the day, Seth, that you're focusing on the things you need to focus on. If your membership is engaged and conscientious, they'll let you know if you're not focusing on something that you probably should be. And so we've got, I just can't say enough about how blessed we are and how great our membership is. That helps us keep in tune. That's make sure we're in tune and aligned with the concerns and all that goes with that, representing that segment of the world.
Okay. Well, Nate, man, is there anything else you want to add? We're kind of at the end of our discussion, but is there anything you want to add before we wrap up that we maybe didn't discuss, or just something you want to throw in here before we completely wrap
I
up?
No, again, appreciate the opportunity. I think this shows a little color and gives a little color to what's going on with railroad ties and how railroad ties kind of fit into the world. We need railroad ties. We need our railroads to keep running for a variety of reasons. In terms of the listener, I'd say that you know I can stand on a soapbox and talk about things and want you to be involved more as our input costs are always going up. I applaud those members out there that still engage and want to be part and active and contribute to these trade associations because it's pivotal. And the folks that don't see that and aren't involved, how do we best provide witness and testimony to them to then get involved? And I'd say it's word of mouth is probably the strongest, Seth. And so with y'all's association and mine, I could tell a pretty good story about RTA and probably be pretty convincing. But at the end of the day, when somebody has to write a check for membership or agrees to sponsorship, they usually look at their peers, other members, to really seal the deal, if you will. They look at those members providing that testimony, that word of mouth, to help grow the association, maintain the association, grow the association. And so I really would encourage and try to inspire your members, our members, to collectively contribute to these associations to help these associations operate with all the great things that the association is doing, the events, the technology transfer, the engagement, whether it's influence politically or site visits, all those great things. And so, what I pontificate on to the young professional, I've been writing a book for 3 years that doesn't seem to be wanting to finish itself. but it's a primer for the young professional. It's called The Power of Presence. And so anybody listening out there, there's a host of things you can do as a young professional to help advance your knowledge base and really propel your trajectory within the field that you want to be in. And it's a combination of a bunch of simple things. But think about the power of presence. And so, as we are in today's society with lots of text messaging and emailing, think about the power of calling somebody up, maybe even doing a wellness check. At the end of the day, we're all people, we're humans, and these are relationship oriented type businesses that we're in. Think about the impact and influence you could have just doing a wellness check on somebody, and then what doors that could potentially open. You were present in that situation. You had the power of presence to engage both personally and professionally. It can't steer you wrong. And so I would encourage the listeners, by and large, we see mostly younger, middle-aged and younger folks that actually listen to a podcast. And so maybe that was my soapbox to the targeted audience is think about the power of your presence, your connection to your role, and then lead that into these engagement tactics that help project your trajectory as a professional. And it could start with just a simple text message, phone call, etc. Maybe a simple wellness check and check on somebody. Maybe that could be your good deed for the day. Maybe you do that tomorrow, and then the day after that, and then the day after that.
It just becomes a routine at that point to keep that going.
Yep.
Well, Nate, man, yeah, thank you so much for joining me, for giving me some of your time today to talk about this. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you. So thank you so much for giving me this hour or so that we've been talking.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, thank you. It likewise. It went both ways. Appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank you guys, dear listener, for catching us a new episode today. We want to make sure we give a special shout out and thank you one more time to DDK Forestry and Real Estate for their support of the show. And as always, we want to thank some guy named Rob McCormick for the use of our theme song, The Same Love. That's off of his album, The Folkster. We'll have more or a link to his website where you can find some show information, music information. And as always, you can find more of his music on Spotify. And I want to make sure, too, we're going to make sure we put the Railway Ties Association website in the description of this episode if you want to learn more about what they have going on over there at the association and find some more statistics that they have posted on that site as well. So make sure you come back next month when we'll have a new topic, a new discussion, and a new Voice of Forestry.